We start in Columbus, where the number 2 Ohio State Buckeyes are hosting number 5 Indiana. This is a 13.5-point spread in favor of the Buckeyes. An 11 a.m. kick on Fox. Feels like this should be a night game with all the playoff implications, but I'll turn it over to you guys first. Trey, what do you feel like the biggest storyline coming out of this game is, or going into this game, I should say?
Unfortunately, it feels like the biggest storyline is Indiana's strength of schedule, and that really takes away from just living in the moment and enjoying a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten this late in the season. Indiana, I know there's a story about how they dropped Louisville in the non-conference and replaced them with Western Illinois or whatever. Other than that, they can only play the teams that are on the schedule, and they've beaten everybody on their schedule so far. So, yes, the strength of schedule is lacking, but they have a chance to fix that this week. And it's really taking away from the conversation on the field of what I think is going to be a good game. I'm going to take Indiana to cover the spread. 13.5 points just seems like a lot for not only what we've seen out of Indiana and the way that they've played this year, but how Ohio State has typically played in these types of games. Guys, you have to go all the way back to 2021 to find the last time Ohio State beat a ranked team by 2 touchdowns. That was when Kenneth Walker led Michigan State, was all the way up at number 7, and they were humbled when they played the Buckeyes to the tune of a 56-7 loss late in the year. I think they extended Mel Tucker right before that game too, so all kinds of errors coming out of that one. But I will say I do think there's a path to a blowout win for Ohio State. That's not completely off the table for me. Michigan, maybe they had a blueprint on how to slow this offense down. They did hold Curtis Rourke under 9 yards per attempt for the first time. No team had done that since FIU did it in week 1, and I think those circumstances were completely different. So really interested to see how this Indiana passing attack especially matches up with the Ohio State secondary. I think that's going to decide how close this one ultimately is and if Indiana actually has a chance to pull off a shocker.
That's a good point that you make about the Ohio State secondary. Guys, Denzel Burke came into this season as one of the top corners projected in this NFL draft, and he has gotten burned multiple times this year. It's been quite often that we've seen the big-time opponents pick on Burke. We saw Oregon do it to great effect. We saw Penn State try and do it a little bit as well. There have just been moments where you've gone, I don't know if that's the first-round cornerback that we thought we had coming into this season. Indiana is in the Big Ten championship game with a win over Oregon. They've got stakes that they're playing for like never before. We've obviously already hit the 10-win mark for Indiana, a program first. Now, can Indiana take that next step? Can they put all the noise about who they have or who they haven't played behind them and go into an enemy territory and knock off the Ohio State Buckeyes? Ohio State, furthermore, is down their starting center. Seth McLaughlin tore his Achilles. Reports that maybe it was done at practice, maybe it was done off the field. Regardless, a terrible injury for Ohio State. Really, an offensive line that was already dealing with injuries now loses their captain up front as well. I'm throwing the metrics out in this game. You look at some of the numbers, and Ohio State has certainly been an impressive team. Indiana has been bludgeoning just about everybody that they've played. But I'm throwing the numbers out, and I'm going purely eye test here. And Trey, very similar to what you're saying, Ohio State has not showed me consistently the ability to take an opponent that is above average and just blow them out or put them away comfortably. And I think if Ohio State is going to do that, they're going to have to do it early in this game. They're going to have to jump on Indiana and get the crowd into it early. I trust Indiana to stay in this game. I trust their wide receiving core. I trust the running backs that are 4 deep. And I think Indiana has played well defensively as well. I just think that this is a good enough team to stick around. And if they are going to lose, you get 13 points to lose by. So I'm going to take Indiana plus the points as well.
I'm going to be the stick in the mud here, and I'm going to go ahead and say that I think Ohio State covers this and wins this game fairly comfortably. And I really went back and forth on this, and this is a tough one for me to decide on because, you look at this is a real strength on strength. Indiana's got the second best scoring offense in the country. Ohio State has the best scoring defense in the country. So it's a real strength on strength thing. You're kind of like, okay, which one's going to break? You can break down the individual matchups. You can break down, who in the secondary is a little vulnerable for Ohio State. Who do we think can have a big time day for Indiana on the offensive side. But guys, for me, this comes down to this. I think, first off, I want to go ahead and give Indiana their props. They've been playing exceptionally well, and they've been playing, I think, well above what the talent level on their roster indicates. I love what Cignetti's doing. I love what he's been able to accomplish, but he's, I think, punching well above what his weight has been up to this point. He's definitely been going in there and taking out teams that have better rosters, right? They're just teams that have better talent because they've been able to establish that talent over the course of however many years it's been. So again, still year one for Cignetti. Really, the problem for me came a couple weeks ago when they play Michigan. And this is the first time that they were really, against a team and playing up against a team where they weren't automatically just, even in skill talent, or maybe the margin was kind of close. Michigan was kind of the better talented team, and their offense struggled for the first time kind of all season. They put out 20 points. Their previous low was 31. For me, I think the disparity is even greater against Ohio State. I think the offense is going to struggle because at a certain point, though I don't think that Ryan Day at this stage, I don't necessarily trust him to coach a better game than Cignetti. I just think at some point the talent has to win out. I think at some point the Jimmies and the Joes for Ohio State are just better. They're just better athletes, better players. And at a certain point, I think that's just going to win out. I think that, as fun as it's been and as good of a season as it's been, and there should be absolutely no shame for Indiana. You're probably going to finish the season 11-1 and end up hosting a playoff game. But despite all of that, I still think that Indiana probably loses this game by a fair margin. I think they're going to keep it respectable, but I think they probably lose something like 14 to 17 points here. I think Ohio State has some stuff to prove. I think Ohio State knows they need to get it together, and I think they're going to go out there and put out a great performance.
So talk to me about the aftermath of this game. Let's say that Indiana loses this game, but they cover the number. They keep it respectable. They give it a puncher's chance, and Kirk Cignetti and the boys walk out of Columbus with their heads held high. 11-1 Indiana. Do they make the college football playoff as an large team? Garrett, you're saying they host.
I think they host, yeah. Because now
based on what?
Well, so the committee's already shown that this team should be up there, right? They're currently ranked in a hosting spot, right? They're currently ranked where they would be hosting. When you're looking at the teams further down that list, we talked about it a little bit on the live show talking about the reactions. There's just kind of an SEC logjam, and not all of those teams are going to end up making the playoff. There's a lot of teams kind of log jammed in there towards the bottom of the playoff. Some of those teams are going to lose. Some of those teams are going to not make the SEC championship game, and they're going to get passed up by other teams. I think one of those teams that has a chance to make the case that they should be seated higher is Indiana. I think if your one loss is to a team like Ohio State, who could finish, as high as 2 or 3, assuming they don't beat Oregon. If they do beat Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, they could finish as the number 1 team in the country. If that's where you're sitting as Indiana and your resume says I'm 11-1 and my only loss is on the road to Ohio State, especially in the circumstances you gave, Mitch, where it's a close game, I don't see how they aren't hosting a game against a 2-loss SEC team, or maybe even a Notre Dame who their loss is a lot more glaring of a problem. Notre Dame doesn't really have the strength of schedule argument either. There's some problems with everybody's resume this year, and I think if you're a one-loss team who can boast a pretty good scoring margin, you can boast all of the things that Indiana's been able to accomplish this year. If you could do that, I think you're hosting, and I think you're in.
I hope you're right, Garrett. I really do. I have my doubts that the committee is going to do that, though. I think there's a chance that they get Florida Stated, honestly, if they lose this one. If they cover, I think they're in decent shape. And I do think that they would be traveling if this is a close game. But if they lose this one and it's an Ohio State cover or an Ohio State win by about 3 touchdowns, there's a real chance that they get Florida Stated, man. And I hate that, but that's just the world that we're living in right now.
I will say, and I want to make this point because I was thinking about this a little bit earlier. I think even with the loss, Indiana has a very similar case for the playoff as the Texas Longhorns, assuming no conference championship, right? If the Texas Longhorns don't win the conference, it's a similar case because the wins just haven't been there. The losses are quality, but the wins just haven't been there. right? They were even flashed the graphic for Texas's best wins, and they said Vandy and Arkansas, and I was like, well, that's not exactly a murderer's row of wins there for the Longhorns. And I don't want to turn this into a bashing Texas segment, obviously, but right now, if you're just looking at both teams where they are right now, the wins just aren't there. If Texas is able to win out and win the conference, obviously it's a different case, but just where they stand right now, I don't really see the massive difference. I know that maybe top to bottom, the quality of team isn't exactly the same in the Big Ten as it is in the SEC. I know that there's probably some Big Ten fans that are going to, hate me for even saying that, but I just think at the same time you have to say, well, who have you really beaten up to this point? For Indiana, it's Michigan. For Texas, is it Vanderbilt? Is it Arkansas? I just think that the argument is similar for both teams, saying, hey, you've got a bunch of wins, but really who against?
Well, in theory it is, but the strength of record metrics favor the Longhorns by almost 70 places in that. And so I think that's where Indiana is in danger of really getting left out. Now, the way I look at it, Garrett, I do tend to agree with you that I think they find their way into the field. If they lose this game, I would be shocked if they're hosting a playoff game. I think that one chance at a statement win is going to be held against them, for better or for worse. If they keep it close, I think they're in. If they get blown out, I think they're rooting for a little bit of chaos in rivalry weekend to kick a couple of teams out. They're certainly rooting for the Big 12 champ to, come from out of nowhere. Maybe it's Arizona State. We'll see. But this is going to be, I think a bookmark in the history of the playoff. Depending on what happens in this game, you're going to have folks either say the system works or the system doesn't work. You're going to have calls for reform, anti-expansionist takes, what have you, depending on what happens in this game. So without a doubt, I think it's the biggest story going on in our sport this week.
And one more thing on that. As a fan of an SEC team and as a person who thinks the SEC is the best conference in football, if a one-loss Indiana, whose only loss is to Ohio State, can't find their way in to the playoff, if they get left out at 13, as opposed to like 10-2 Tennessee or something like that, I will be all up in arms, pitchforks right there alongside all Hoosiers fans and all of the rest of college football, because that's ridiculous. Like at a certain point, you have to reward winning. They've been blowing teams out all season. Their first close game they play all year is against Michigan. That's still a really solid defense. Like, again, I don't think that they win this game against Ohio State. I'm not trying to make the case that they're just this awesome juggernaut, but they're a damn good team, and they should be in the playoff instead of a non-SEC champion, 10-2, somewhere in that mix type of team.
Indiana has looked how you want teams to look against inferior competition, right? They're taking it to them. Offensively, defense has played very well. They forced some turnovers. They've had big splash plays. They've really checked all the boxes. Where I'm hopeful that they get the nod is you look at what the conference schedule could have been, and I think that takes a sting out of, in my mind, the resulting strength of record. I mean, honestly, it's going to go back to if you beat a team when they're ranked, but then they lose a bunch of games. Is that a ranked win? Is it not?
Are you talking about strength of record or strength of schedule?
Well, I think both. Strength of schedule is where they're.
Strength of schedule is where the big delta is
yes.
for Indiana. Strength of record, Indiana is actually 6th in the country. So the one that measures if the average top 25 team would have the same record as Indiana, they're actually 6th in the country. So that actually
right behind Texas.
Yeah.
But strength of schedule, the
argument's the same. What I will say is this: like, if they leave Indiana out and then they use the phrase "eye test" at any point in time to justify somebody making the playoff this year, I will be the first one grabbing my pitchfork, heading straight to Grapevine. I won't stand for it, man. It is not a long walk for me. I will be there. And this isn't obviously a threat or anything like that. Don't take it that serious. But I will be
for legal purposes.
Yeah,
for legal purposes. This is obviously a joke. But yeah, that would be absurd. I would be right there with all the Big Ten fans if they get left out, and then they use the eye test for like Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, somebody like that. Like if whoever, pick your SEC team that doesn't end up winning it all. I would be absolutely pissed off with the rest of the Big Ten and the rest of the college football world about that.
The problem
also,
is,
side note to Big Ten fans, if we want to use the strength of record argument, that means 5 SEC teams get in. So
which
stupid games, win stupid prizes.
I think is a very real possibility. I outlined that in my last article. It just the way the math lines up. I do think we're heading with the ACC and the Big 12 essentially becoming one big bid leagues. I think we're headed towards 5 SEC teams. We'll see how many Big 10 teams get in. I would love for Indiana to get in for sure.
Gracious him. How about